Okay, there's a couple. That's like a BT-5. Someone else behind him as well. Let's go for him first. Okay, there we go. Take out the BT-5. It's not much of a threat. And what's this back here? Boom. Easy. Okay, that's an object 120. This has been a really lucrative spot so far, but I think it's probably time to move on. No issue. Oh my god, okay. We survived that. How am I still alive? Wow. Did he just shoot that missile out of the sky? Alright, well that's my last round. That's like a lot of kills. I think there's still someone around here though. It's like a little beak. Oh no! 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 No, you... No! No, you did not! No! You know when I said, don't expect much tank content from me in the next few weeks? Well, psych, we're doing tanks, because fuck RRBQs right now. Although I guess technically these aren't tanks if you want to be all actually about it. Modern wheeled vehicles and scout vehicles are something of an interest of mine, and when the Type 87 RCV was added in Update Direct Hit, it quickly became one of my favourite vehicles. Since then, a lot of people have talked about similar types like the LAV-25 or BTR-80, and the most recent update just gave Italy the Freccia. Freccia?
Freccia. Freccia.
Freccia. Freccia. We're just going to pronounce that wrong, how about that? As it turns out, there are a ton of these kinds of vehicles that could be added to different nations, so I wanted to make a video just going over them for each tech tree, talking about their capabilities and how they could fit into War Thunder. I ended up coming across so many of these types of vehicles that I've had to split this video into two parts. In this video, we'll cover NATO and the West, while in the next one we'll do Russia and China. Specifically, we're looking at wheeled IFV type vehicles equipped with autocannons and potentially ATGMs. I also included a couple of dedicated ATGM carriers, but we're avoiding types with large tank-sized cannons like the M1128 or Radpanzer, though there are still several more of them that could come too. Personally, I love playing these types of vehicles, and I hope to see many of these in-game, with a few meme exceptions that probably won't make it but are still fun to talk about. And it's been a while since I did one of these videos, so let's get into it. Starting out with the US, we get arguably the most famous of all of these kinds of vehicles, the LAV-25. This is an amphibious 8-wheeled recon vehicle used by the US Marine Corps, as well as being borrowed by the Army for Desert Storm. This is the basic platform the LAV-AD was based on, but you may know it better as the vehicle from the Battlefield 3 and 4 cover. It's armed with a 25mm Bushmaster cannon from the Bradley, but without the TOW missile launcher. I'm also not sure to get the DU APFSDS from the M3A3, as that round only entered service in the late 90s, and there's a reason I don't think it should, which will become apparent later on. The APDS round has over 80mm penetration, which is only slightly less than the RCV's dart and plenty enough for killing IFVs and other light vehicles. The Bushmaster gun does have a much slower rate of fire than the RCVs, but on the other hand it has a stabiliser. As for mobility, it'll be the same as the LAV-AD, with the same engine and transmission and half a ton less weight. I think the right BR for it would be 8.3, alongside the RCV and just below the Freccia. Unlike the RCV, the LAV would get a thermal optic, making up for the lower pen and rate of fire. You might think, well, why would I play it over the Bradley at 8.0, but the LAV definitely has its advantages, being able to get around a map much more quickly on roads, and given that wheeled vehicles don't lose all their speed when they turn, you can manoeuvre well in close quarters as well. Next up is the Striker ICVD, or Dragoon, which is an M1126 Striker fitted with a remote turret housing a 30mm gun. It also has 3rd gen gunner and commander optics, but beyond that it's a Striker hull, so expect similar mobility to the M1128 MGS. The gun is the Mark 44 Bushmaster, which can be seen in game on the VCC 8030, the Dardo upgrade. It's gotta be my favourite autocannon, and yes, I'm naughty enough to have one of them. The Mark 44 penetrates up to 116mm with APFSDS, which is much better than any 25mm. You also have the benefit of not having ammo in the hull. With all this, I'd put the ICVD at 9.0. It should have the option to mount the MGS cage armor kit, but I've never seen this specific variant with it, not that it makes any real difference. In fact, I want the MGS to have it as a modification so that we can take it off to get better mobility. It does weigh 4 tons after all. While those two would go into the light tank line, the same types can go into the TD line as well as ATGM platforms. Firstly is the LAV-AT for anti-tank. This is the same LAV-25 chassis with the turret of the M901, meaning ITO missiles and thermal optics. There's not much to say on this one, and given that it's quite similar to the Mephisto but with a higher power to weight ratio, I'd put it at BR 8.7, and I'd kind of put the Mephisto there too. Not that it's overpowered or anything, but it's better suited fighting T-72Bs than M47s. Then at the higher BR, we have the same concept on the Striker hull. A lot of people get tricked into thinking that the M1128 or Striker MGS is some kind of tank destroyer, given that it has the same kind of 105mm tank gun from the M1 Abrams. In actual fact, the MGS is an assault gun made for infantry support, with the tank destroyer of the Striker family being the M1134. Unlike the LAV-AT, this vehicle can fire TOW-2A and B missiles, while having better thermals including a CITV. It also avoids that long turret unpacking time of the M901, able to fire as soon as it comes to a stop. This one I'd put at 9.3, given that it's still a lot bigger a target than the 9.7 Weasel. But of course, the most important vehicle for America, which I just couldn't go without mentioning, is the mighty Humvee. The M1036 was a Humvee variant fitted with a TOW missile launcher, and it's almost become a meme with people asking for it for War Thunder. Like the M1134, the Humvee TOW would use TOW-2As and Bs, and keeping in mind that the Weasel 1A2 with these missiles is BR 9.7, the same thing but with the performance of the Type 93 would be at least 10.0. Even off-road, the Type 93 performs incredibly well, much better than any other wheeled vehicle, and in fact most if not all tracked light tanks too, and the Humvee would be exactly the same. I can honestly say that the Type 93 is one of the most enjoyable vehicles in-game for rushing caps, scouting, or even just being a battlefield medic, just because of how ridiculously fast it is. Having a whole bunch of TOW-2A missiles on effectively the same vehicle would just be a nut. There's also this. This is the Oshkosh JLTV, or Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, with the remote-operated Protector RS6 turret. That's the 30mm chain gun from the Apache. And a Javelin. There is no limit to what we will put on remote weapon stations these days. There's even a remote weapon station with another remote weapon station just slapped on top of it. The Striker Dragoon's turret is actually a member of the Protector family as well, the RT-40. This is the equivalent option for light vehicles like armoured cars and MRAPs, but you can also put them on tanks, because why not? The gun isn't nearly as punchy as other 30mm like the Bushmaster or 2A42, and I'm not sure how many reloads of Javelin missiles the JLTV could carry, but it seems to be about 7. If added to the game, the power of the Javelin alone, which is a fire and forget top attack missile with a tandem warhead and 1000mm penetration, would make the JLTV RS6 a 10.7 vehicle in my opinion. Performance-wise, the JLTV should again be about the same as the Type 93, with actually a slightly higher top speed though a lower acceleration, but enough armour to shrug off 7.62mm machine guns. Remember the armoured car from April Fools, and the ATGMs that thing had? That's what this would be like. You might think that this would be one of the fastest ground vehicles in War Thunder, but just you wait till we get to the Lamborghini. Yeah, now you want to keep watching, don't you? Stepping over to Germany, I wanted to take a look at the Boxer. This is another 8x8 armed recon vehicle with a similar power to weight and the same 100 kph top speed as the Striker. It entered service in 2011 and has been or will be exported to several countries in different variants. The one we're interested in is the Lance. This variant has a version of the Puma's turret without the super tall APS mount but with a 7.62mm machine gun instead. There are versions of this system with spike missiles like the one Australia uses, but those are a potential addition to this variant and the German one doesn't have them, at least not yet. It wouldn't have nearly the armour or the active protection system of the Puma, so I think it'd be fine at 9.0 alongside the Striker Dragoon, which it's basically equivalent to. It does have slightly more penetration, but I don't think it's enough to matter. Then there's the Boxer RT60, which is basically this on steroids. The RT60 turret, again part of the Protector family, is an alternative to the Lance and fits a Mark 44 Bushmaster, but can also accept a 40mm, I think it's a CTA cannon. Kongsberg, can you please make a Protector system with like a 90mm cannon? Because, As if that weren't enough, the turret also has a twin launcher for Spike missiles, which are interchangeable for American Javelin or French Acheron missiles. All basically the same in capability, but just preferred by different nations. The spikes it uses luckily aren't the non-line of sight version, which should absolutely under no circumstances ever come to War Thunder. Spike MRs are still very deadly, so the Boxer RT60 would fit at 10.7 in my opinion, or 11.0 if tanks finally get decompressed to 11.3. Next up is Britain, starting out with the FV721 Fox. If you took the chassis of the AML-90 and put the turret of a Warrior on it minus the missiles, this is basically what you'd get. The Fox Armoured Reconnaissance Vehicle was developed in the late 60s and entered service in 1973, and features the Warrior's Radon cannon in a low-profile turret. Its fire rate is slow and it isn't stabilised, but its APDS rounds do penetrate 110mm of armour. Unlike the Warrior, this vehicle wouldn't have a thermal sight, but it makes up for that in mobility, and being so light it would still perform well off-road, so I think it could still sit at 8.0. The same turret was also used on the Tracked Sabre, which could be added as a premium, event, battle pass or squadron vehicle, as could the alternative Scimitar and Scimitar Mark II, or they could be folded and go into the tech tray before the Warrior. Just thought I'd bring them up. Moving on, I want to talk about the ASLAV. This is basically the same as the LAV-25 we opened with, and is the reason why I didn't suggest giving the LAV-25 the APFSDS rounds, as this vehicle doesn't use them. Beyond that, it's the same thing, and is operated by the Australian Defence Force. Personally, I think it can go to Britain just fine at the same 8.3 BR, though I know some American fans won't like me saying that. Keep in mind though, this variant is actually built by another Commonwealth nation, Canada, not the US, and I could have suggested the Canadian LAV-2 here just as easily, but I had to pick the ASLAV as I've actually had the opportunity to hop inside a couple of these things and have a good look around. The videos are up on the channel. When it comes to Commonwealth vehicles in the British tech trade, there's always a bit of back and forth. Really, I think it depends on how unique to that nation the vehicle is. But because I'm advocating for the US LAV-25 to be made less powerful in order to not imbalance the same vehicle being in the British trade because it's used by Australia, I kind of know what the response is going to be. Less controversial is the South African Badger ICV, equivalent to the Striker Dragoon or Boxer Lance. This is the replacement for the Rattle and is based on the Finnish Patria AMV, which we'll revisit later. The Badger began testing with the South African National Defence Force in 2018, but hasn't entered service due to financing issues with the company building it, Denel. The turret is a domestically made modular weapon system with a domestically made gun, which is stabilised and fires APFSDS rounds that can penetrate over 100mm. It does only have a fire rate of 60 rounds per minute, fired in quick 3-round bursts, but I'm not sure if this is the advised way to shoot it to not risk overheating, or whether it's actually limited to firing like that. The vehicle does have a thermal sight for the gunner, and with similar mobility to the other 8-wheeled IFVs, it belongs at, you guessed it, 9.0. Before moving on to France and Italy, we have to talk about Japan. Unfortunately, Japan is the only nation on this list without multiple vehicles of this type to add, but there might be one. This is the CCV, a prototype built to replace the RCV with a 40mm CTA cannon, the same type of gun the HSTVL uses. That gun has a fire rate of 750 rounds per minute, and uses both an APFSDS round and an air-bursting fragmentation round similar to the German Ahead round on the Puma. This is sounding closer to an SPAA vehicle, but I thought I should mention it here just for completion's sake. The problem with this vehicle though is just how little else is known about it, possibly not enough for Gaijin to add it. The chassis is the brother of the Type 16 MCV, which came out of the same project, but other than that there's a lot that's unknown. Like how powerful the 40mm dart was, likely somewhere between the two darts the Stridsford and 9040C has, whether or not the frag round was proximity or time fused, and how many crew it had. It was also supposed to get a radar, but I don't know if it ever did. This would definitely go in the SPAA line for Japan if it does come, and as for BR, it really depends on the ammunition, but I think 10.0 is probably a good estimate. Now for Italy, I want to start by talking about the VBC. For some reason, this is not the Freccia, but the second prototype for it. What's the difference? The position of the smoke grenades. That's it. The prototype has a turret ripped straight from the Dardo IFV, minus the ATGMs, while the production vehicle has the Hit Fist station based on that same turret and mass-produced as a modular system. I don't know why Gaijin chose to put the prototype into the tech tray and not the actual Freccia, which is just Italy's LAV-25 with a different gun, and I think that should be changed. It would be very simple to do, and it would change nothing about the vehicle's capabilities or BR. If anything, the prototype could have made for a great event reward, as Italy doesn't tend to get too many of them. But it's too late for that now. I guess there's always the Leone. When I first saw that we were getting a Freccia prototype, I assumed it was because it lacked thermals or APFSDS rounds or something, to distinguish it from the production Fregina, but the PT2 ended up receiving both. A lot of people suggested that we got a prototype first because the production Freccia has spike missiles, but that's a different variant, the Freccia CAT, or Combat Anti-Tank. The base model, designated as Freccia C, just has the gun. And that's what this should be. Prototypes and experimental models belong as event vehicles and such in my opinion. The CAT is another variant that could be added, and I think a BR of 10.3 works well for it. It's basically the Boxer RT60, but with the 25 instead of the 30mm cannon. Spikes at 10.3 is iffy though, so possibly it'd have to be 10.7 and just accept the fact that it isn't quite as good, hoping that the Boxer RT60 goes to 11.0 and ground BRs in general see 11.3 soon. That wouldn't really change its matchmaker at all, and with Italy you'd have to use it with a 10.7 lineup anyway, but it is more representative of balance between those vehicles. The third Freccia variant I want to bring up is the Evo, which mounts the familiar Mark 44 Bushmaster gun, and would fit at 9.0 alongside the ICBD, Lance and Badger. There's also the Swiss-built Moag Piranha, which could come to Italy as a premium. In Irish service, it was equipped with the Mark 44 Bushmaster using the Italian Hetfist 30 turret. That's the turret from the Dardo upgrade. The Piranha is a distant cousin of the Striker, and as a universal chassis with various modular turrets, it has a massive variety of versions that could be added from nations like Romania, Switzerland, Belgium or Spain. The issue is what nation they'd go to, but this version definitely fits in the Italian tray at BR 9.0, and now that I think about it, Squadron Reward, that'd be a good thing. Now working backwards now, we have the Fiat 6616H used by Peru. This is the same chassis the Obel uses, but this variant mounts the Rheinmetall 20mm autocannon and a twin launcher for Chinese HJ73C ATGMs. The missiles are based on the Malyutka, but are SACLOS guided, and the vehicle carries at least 4 spare. I'm unsure as to whether or not it gets a thermal sight, so I'll say its BR should be 7.7 without or 8.0 with. Basically, it's a smaller and faster Marder with different missiles. Now I know we've been covering Italy in a wee bit of a weird order, but before we get to the real ridiculousness, I want to jump right up to 11.0. I said this video was just going to be about wheeled IFVs and not those with big tank cannons. This kind of bridges that line, but after covering the Japanese CCV, I thought I'd better cover the Draco. There's not much to this one, it's a modified automatic turret on the hull of the Centauro. Obviously it'd go into the SPAA line, and given that the automatic is already 10.7, this would have to be 11.0. Which feels a wee bit weird, but not nearly as weird as our next vehicle. And now we get to the height of all meme vehicles in War Thunder.
The Lamborghini then.
This is the Lamborghini LM002, otherwise known as the Rambo Lambo, and if there's one vehicle on this whole list I want to be added, it's this one. Despite it probably being the least likely to come. Despite being most known for sports cars and supercars like the Gallardo or Aventador, Lamborghini actually have a history with several off-road military spec vehicles. Firstly was the Cheetah, then in the late 80s they made the LM002, which is basically the R3T20 on super steroids. I can't even call this an armoured car, it's just a car. You can literally buy one of these, without the gun. Hell, Doug DeMuro did a video on one. They cost more than a Huracan, but that's beside the point. Oh, and it was in the first Fast and Furious movie too. The LM002 has a nearly 500 horsepower V12 engine from the Lamborghini Countach, allowing it to reach a top speed of, get this, 200 kilometers per hour. It can also accelerate from 0 to 100 in about 7 seconds, which, to put it into perspective, is 2.5 times faster than the Type 93. As if all that wasn't ridiculous enough, the gun is the 25mm from the Dardo. Because why not? That means APFSDS with 90mm penetration and 600 rounds per minute, and this gun was stabilised. I honestly have no idea what battle rating to suggest for this vehicle, and in the Russian-Chinese video, which should be out in the next couple of days, I'm bringing up a similar vehicle, the Typhoon VDV, which I can suggest a proper BR for, but this one is twice the speed. There's just nothing in game to compare it to, it's such a ridiculous concept. This is now my favourite armoured vehicle in the world. For fronts, we just have two 4x4s, and the first one is pretty simple. This is the Panhard VBL armoured car with a Milan ATGM station. It's basically a wheeled version of the Weasel 1A2, or in other words, it's France's Humvee tow, but a wee bit smaller. It has a thermal gunner sight, is amphibious, and carries 6 spare missiles in the rear hull, or I guess the boot? /trunk if you're American. The VBL has one less crew member, and despite actually weighing 25% more than the Weasel, it has about the same power to weight, while achieving a higher top speed. The standard Milan variant it carried was the Milan 2, which the Warrior has, but there was also an upgrade to give it Milan ER missiles, which have a tandem charge warhead and an electronic beacon to defeat the T-90's active protection system. This is definitely the best version to add, as the variants with hot or tow missiles carried fewer reloads. I believe the tow variant only had 4 missiles, while this model has 7. There was also a variant with 4 Cornet missiles, which could make a good event vehicle, I'm not sure how many reloads it carried, but either way we'd be looking at both the Milan and Cornet variants being 9.7 alongside the Weasel, or maybe 10.0. There are also two AA versions of the VBL that could be added, equivalent to the Weasel 1A4 with the 20mm and the Ocelot with the manpads, but we'll go over them in another video. The second French vehicle on this list is the EBRC Jaguar. This is a very modern, 6-wheeled recon vehicle meant to replace the AMX-10 RC and ERC-90, which is basically the AML-90's big brother. It was also designed to fill the Mephisto's role, and it began entering service with the French army in 2020. It's quite an insane vehicle, protected all around against Russian 14.5mm machine gun rounds, and with a 500 horsepower engine giving it a top speed of 90 km/h. It's equipped with what appears to be a soft kill active protection system known as the TDA Armaments Active Blocking System, as well as the novel system of a gunfire locator, basically a system to listen for gunfire and tell the crew where it's coming from. I feel like in War Thunder this would work a bit like the radar/laser warning systems, or Gaijin could just not add it. I mean, they still haven't given the EBRs functional center wheels. It does have a warning system for incoming missiles as well. Basically, it's armed to the teeth with warning systems. It's also armed to the teeth with actual armaments though, using a 40mm CTA cannon that can penetrate 140mm of armor with APFSDS. This is the same gun the British Ajax fighting vehicle uses, and I'm pretty sure it's the same one we mentioned the Protector RT-60 turret and the Boxer can also be modified with. The idea of CTA, or Case Telescoped Ammunition weapons, is to embed the projectile in the propellant, which means it won't have to be quite as long to get the same velocity or penetrative effect. It can also increase muzzle velocity considerably, and it allows for higher rates of fire using swing breech mechanisms, with the drawback of more quickly overheating the barrel. I'm hugely oversimplifying the concept, and it's actually incredibly interesting to look into, so expect a video on it on the Armorcast channel at some point soon. CTA cannons are basically the future of autocannons, and the Jaguar proves this, replacing both 90 and 105mm guns with a 40mm. It's not specified at what range that 140mm penetration figure comes from, but it's likely 1,000 meters. I highly doubt it's for point blank range, as documentation almost never evaluates them that way, but this is the sort of problem you run into with such modern developments. Obviously Gaijin's research is going to be a lot better than mine, although alongside the APFSDS, the Jaguar can also fire an airbursting round which is meant for dismounted infantry, drones, aircraft and helicopters, or potentially incoming missiles, though I'm purely speculating on that last part. The fire rate of the CTA cannon is 200 rounds per minute, and the gun can elevate to 75 degrees. I'm not sure of how much ammunition it carries. If you haven't clicked by now, I really like these cannons, they're extremely cool. Alongside the gun though is a twin launcher for the Acheron MMP ATGMs, which are, as I mentioned earlier, basically French Spike or Javelin missiles. These missiles, like the Spike Inlaws, have the ability to be TV guided, basically like a Predator missile, and just as with the Spikes, there's no way that functionality could ever be added into the game, as you could just sit on a friendly cap and kill the entire enemy team without ever being visible. Gaijin could add the MMP with just the same locking and firing mechanics as the Javelin and Spike MR, without them being massively overpowered. You'd still need to have line of sight to the target, meaning they can shoot you, while locking the target might take a few seconds. The Jaguar only carries 2 spare missiles, but given how powerful this vehicle would be, I'd suggest putting it right the way to 11.0, maybe 10.7 minimum. This thing's designed to eat T90s and BMP3s for breakfast. And that's all for friends, aside from about 40 potential earlier wheeled vehicles with SS11 systems. What the fuck? Any of these could be added at around 7.3. I'll link an article that goes over all of them. Just take your pick. This video's already too long. Sweden is very simple to talk about, as there's really only 3 vehicles that matter. The first being the LAV-25, which we've already gone over twice. The second is the Finnish Patria AMV, which the South African Badger was based on. The vehicle itself is very comparable to the Striker or Boxer once again, and entered service in the mid-2000s. The interesting part is the different weapon systems, with various iterations mounting the familiar Protector series of remote weapon stations. Like the Moag Piranha, a couple of international variants of this platform could be added to Sweden as event, squadron or battle pass vehicles, as they don't really fit in the tech tree. One of these is the AMV-35, offered to Australia for the Land 400 program, but rejected. This variant has a 35mm cannon, which is basically a downscaled version of the CV-90's 40mm, and variants of the CV-90 have used it, which oddly haven't been added to the game yet. A couple of tech tree models could be added, one with just the 30mm Mark 44 Bushmaster and a turret similar to the Italian hip fist system, and another with the Protector RT-60 turret, which we covered on the upgraded German Boxer. They'd obviously go at those equivalent BRs, so 9.0 and 10.7 respectively, while the AMV-35 could be a 9.3 or 9.7 depending on how powerful that 35mm gun is. There's also a version with the turret from the Centauro MGS we have in game that should definitely be added too. These are all finished versions and prototypes, as Sweden, who do use the vehicle, don't use variants with cannons, but Gaijin have said that Finland will be fully integrated into the Swedish tree in the same way that South Africa was for Britain, so they fit perfectly fine. The last nation to cover is Israel, who only have a single vehicle to talk about, and it's arguably the most impressive one of all, the ATAN. Another standard 8-wheeled 30mm equipped IFV with 100 kph top speed, thermals, all the good stuff, right? What's so special? Well, not only does the ATAN have a launcher for 2 Spike MR missiles, basically putting it on par with the RT-60 systems, but it also has a hard-kill active defense system, and that system is Iron Fist. This is the active protection system on the Challenger 2 Black Knight, which can actually intercept incoming APFSDS projectiles if it can detect them early enough. What that means is that from a range of more than 500 meters, this thing becomes literally untouchable without either multi-hit capable weapons like Cornet missiles or decent autocannons, or top attack weapons that get over Iron Fist's radar detection sphere. All the while, it can launch fire and forget top attack missiles at you. Oh, and its turret is unmanned, so good luck killing it if it's hull down. This is one of the most overkill IFVs I think I've ever seen, and I love it. Obviously, the most significant balancing drawback of IFVs and other light-wheeled vehicles is that they have little to no real protection, but that doesn't really apply to the ATAN until you drain its active protection system. With all this capability, it would literally become the best vehicle in the game on long-range maps, being able to skirt around, shoot from behind cover only showing the unmanned turret, and only then just long enough to lock the fire and forget missiles, and even a T-80 BVM or a Leopard 2A6 won't have a chance of killing it alone. This would absolutely be too powerful to even think about adding if we hadn't just suggested the addition of a whole bunch of other vehicles with top attack missiles of their own that can actually deal with it. And Iron Fist needs a minimum distance of 500 meters to intercept an APFSDS round, so on small maps it won't be so insane. It would still have to be a top BR vehicle, so it shouldn't be added until some decompression comes and it can sit at, say, 11.7. Even then it's iffy. I had hoped that there was a variant without spikes that could be 9.7 for example, but it doesn't look like there is. The spike launcher is just hidden underneath a retractable panel. Whew, anyway, that was 25 NATO and Western vehicles of the modern wheeled variety that could be added to War Thunder. Actually, I think 26. Tomorrow, we'll cover a dozen more, looking at Russia and China. Yeah, I said there were a lot of these things. I hope you really enjoyed this video and that you'll let me know what you thought of these suggestions. Who am I kidding? Nobody's still watching at this point. Comment Rambo Lambo if you're still here, guys. And everyone else is going to get so confused. I know a lot of people will have a problem with fire and forget top attack missiles, but I do think they will come to the game eventually. So long as they're line of sight only and have some sort of locking time like Manpads does, they shouldn't be too much of an issue, since most combat in War Thunder takes place at close distances where they don't work anyway. Other than that, obviously a lot of similar vehicles, which I actually think is a really good thing. It's kind of like how every nation has an 8.0 or 8.3 radar AA, and basically everyone has a 6.7 light tank or tank destroyer with 90mm heat FS. Every nation could get a comparable 9.0 wheeled IFV with 30mm APFSDS, the Striker Dragoon, Boxer Lance, Badger ICV, Freccia Evo, and Patria AMV. Russia and China will have their options, we'll go over them in part 2, but this has already been a super long video, so I'll say thanks again, remember to click all the buttons, and I'll catch you on the battlefield. Though you won't catch me, I'll be in the Lamborghini. But around the end of 2021, various Russian tanks, predominantly the T-72B and B3, started to be spotted with these big rooftop cages sitting above the turret, and initial reports supposed that these were a measure to defeat top attack ATGMs. Now if you're not familiar with the concept of a top attack missile, you've almost certainly heard of them, with Ukraine fielding a bunch of them against the invading Russian army, consisting particularly of the Swedish In-Law and the American Javelin.